Good morning, everyone. Katura, thank you for having me. Goodwill, thank you for hosting us today, and thank you to our partners at the North Carolina Chamber and the U.S. Chamber Foundation for making this event possible. Like Katura said, my name is Samantha Cole. I serve in a somewhat unusual role at the North Carolina Department of Commerce. It's at least new. I am their child care business liaison, and that means that my role is all about making sure that high-level conversations, regional conversations, local conversations around economic and workforce development in North Carolina are evaluating child care access as part of their recipe to success. And today I'm going to talk about why child care is so challenging. I realize that this is not necessarily going to be foreign to many of you, so we can move along through that pretty quickly. I can talk a little bit about what's going on at the state level to try to close some of those gaps, and also, most importantly, I think, how business leaders from industries all over the state, different headcounts, different sizes and scales, can all get meaningfully involved in solving this challenge right where they are for their workers and for the communities they're serving, in ways different communities across the state are already really advancing big objectives in that way. So first of all, let's take a look at the problem. One of the reasons why child care access is so difficult to solve is that it's really not just one problem. It's something that my colleagues at Smart Start appropriately refer to as a trilemma. It's really a problem with three different heads. They all sort of circulate and make one another a little trickier to fix. So right at the first, we have the fact that child care tuition is very unaffordable across the state. Right now, the average cost of care for one infant in North Carolina is over $11,000 a year, which exceeds in-state tuition at UNC Chapel Hill. Another problem with affordability is the fact that while many of us who are parents of young kids get a little bit of runway to set aside money, especially in tax-protected savings products for our children's higher education one day, we really don't have that runway whenever we're welcoming kids and growing our families. Many of us are growing our careers and worrying about the cost of housing and maybe paying off student debt. So there's really not that same reserve to dip into to make childcare more affordable. That makes it really inaccessible for a lot of working people across the income spectrum. Then, of course, we face a lot of difficult realities with the childcare workforce. Unfortunately, childcare and early education providers who do yeoman's work to make sure that young people are arriving to kindergarten ready to learn, ready to succeed, ready to grow, that they're safe and healthy, these folks are not rewarded with thriving wages by any means. Many times they don't have access to non-salary benefits that people in other industries have, and it's a very unsustainable career pathway for a lot of folks because of that. And as a result, we just don't have the stability in the early care and education workforce that we would need to be able to provide enough early care and education to meet the demand in our state, which takes us to the third part of our problem, insufficient supply of childcare. This is across all age groups. This is across infant care, toddler care, care for other children under age 5, aftercare. If you're a parent of a young child, you're probably well acquainted with the experience of navigating wait lists. Even if you can afford the care that I was just talking about being too expensive, there's really no guarantee that you can find it and that you can keep it. And these are all challenges that are unfortunately making this problem really tricky. But the good news is there's a growing body of evidence that childcare access is not just a social issue that affects moms and kids. We are working all the time to try to make sure that we better understand the direct relationship between childcare access and developing the economy that we want to see across our state and communities across our state so that people can feel confident living, working, raising families right here in North Carolina the way that we know all of us want to and need to. My colleagues at the North Carolina Chamber have done yeoman's work to raise attention to this. I'll just also turn our attention quickly to this study, which came out around this time last year. It was developed in partnership among my colleagues at NC Commerce's Labor and Economic Analysis Division and NC Child, that really looked at a number of workers who happen to be parents of young children, working age people who are parents of young children, I should say, who were not participating in the workforce in the year 2023. They looked and they found that about 31,000 of these working age adults parenting young kids were not part of the workforce that year. And then they dug a little deeper and said, let's imagine what it would have looked like had we been able to welcome all of those folks back into the workforce, ostensibly if they had access to affordable, high-quality childcare. And this is what they found. They noticed that had we been able to encourage all of those folks to participate in the workforce again, we would have had tens of thousands of other jobs generated by the state's economy, many of them from downstream effects. We would have seen more than $13 billion in annual economic output for the state, and we would have seen a more than $7.5 billion increase in the state's GDP. And whenever we talk about numbers like that, I don't know about you all, but they start to get kind of nebulous to me. They get a little vague. I start to ask myself, what does that really mean? What I want to turn everyone's attention to right now is that all of those billions equal roads, bridges, broadband access, public schools we could build, the types of other infrastructure that we need to have thriving communities now and into future generations, services that many of us depend on. And I also want to say really quickly here that that's because childcare is also one of those components of infrastructure. It's also one of those bits of structure that makes it possible for people to live, work, and raise families here. I'm going to take a second now to turn to some things that the state is doing to help address this in a meaningful way. The first one I want to talk about is something Keturah mentioned a minute ago, which is the newly created North Carolina Task Force on Child Care and Early Education. So Governor Stein established this by Executive Order 10 this past March. It was the first task force that he initiated when he took office. It's a very significant priority for him and the administration, and also for bipartisan colleagues across the General Assembly who have been doing a lot of leadership to make childcare a priority for a long time now. It has bipartisan leadership between Lieutenant Governor Hunt and also Senator Jim Bergen, whose district covers much of Harnett County, which is just south of Raleigh, but he's a great leader in this area. It includes leadership from a large number of individuals from the business community, which I really want to land on here. Again, this is really not about this just being a social issue. It's something that's about making sure that we are achieving our economic and workforce development goals across the state, and the leaders at the table in this conversation understand that, and they want to make sure that we're continuing to raise awareness to that effect. Ultimately, the goal of this group is to make sure that we are advancing opportunities for North Carolinians in every corner of the state to access affordable, high-quality childcare and early education. We just had our first report published in June, and I'm happy to make sure you all get a copy of that or a link to view it that contains some preliminary recommendations for things that we could utilize in the state to make that more possible. Those range from complex ideas like making a child care subsidy floor for those child care reimbursement rates so that we can get more revenue flowing to child care businesses across the state regardless of the zip code that they're delivering care in, all the way to things like linking services that are already operating really well in different parts of the state together into a chain so that we can welcome and support an early care and education workforce across the state of North Carolina that can get people into these careers and keep them there. I also want to turn our attention for a second to NC Commerce's work on this. So back in 2021, the North Carolina Department of Commerce was developing its First in Talent strategic plan, which is really a roadmap to developing the kind of skilled and trained and dedicated workforce that we need in our state to be able to tell big employers that are considering coming to North Carolina and bringing great jobs here that yes, we have the workforce that you're going to be able to enjoy to achieve your goals and fill these available jobs that you want to bring, and also be able to encourage business owners, large and small, here in the state, that they can feel confident continuing to grow their footprints because there's going to be that workforce there to help them achieve their objectives. So this was really that plan. The very first goal that was part of this plan was about preparing our workforce for career and entrepreneurial success. And the very first strategy that they identified to do this a few years ago was making sure that there was more access to affordable, high-quality childcare and early education across the state. And whenever my colleagues at Commerce put their heads together with colleagues at the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, and also colleagues at Invest Early NC, which is a philanthropy collaborative that is located across the state. Different philanthropy leaders from across the state participate in it to try to advance objectives around early care and education. They said we need to create a role that is kind of at the nexus of childcare and economic and workforce development, and they decided to develop this childcare business liaison position. One of the things that I get to do in this role is talk about why childcare benefits that employers can utilize, and that is in both the private and public sectors, can yield benefits for those employers. It's not just something that we're asking employer organizations across the state to do because it's the best thing for our state or it's the best thing for our communities. It's also a smart business decision for them to make, and I get to help them learn about why that is. One of the reports that I turn to pretty frequently was published in March of 2024. It was between an organization called Moms First and Boston Consulting Group, and they analyzed 5 different employers' childcare benefits of 3 different sorts, and they located basically what the talent acquisition and recruitment benefits would look like for other businesses were they to try the same thing. And they looked at the types of benefits that these businesses that were already participating had enjoyed. So they found that 90% of the employers who were engaging in high quality childcare benefits for their workers, and these are things like tuition reimbursements for childcare and on-site or near-site childcare and waitlist priority for workers' children, yielded 90% satisfaction in talent recruitment and retention, which is going to remain a problem in North Carolina for a long time. If you're an employer, because of different demographic trends we're seeing, an aging population and elsewhere, we know that employers are always going to want to see innovative and impactful solutions to make it easier for them to find and hire and keep the talent that they need, so this is a great option. That study also found that there was huge productivity among workers who enjoyed these benefits. So it's not only just about helping employers say, you know what, we're offering this wonderful benefit, you should apply, you should come work here, but it's also about the satisfaction, about keeping those workers growing in their career, gaining experience, developing leadership skills, and helping those organizations to continue to succeed moving forward. I want to talk with you now about a couple of the options that I share with employers and also some of the solutions that employers and communities across the state are already engaging in. So I like to say that I take employers a menu. I like to tell them ultimately, and also those of you in the room who represent employer organizations today, that there really is no wrong way to get started. I want to also dispel the conventional thinking that the only meaningful way to get involved with childcare access on behalf of your workers or for your communities is to build an on-site childcare center. We certainly encourage that. I think it's a wonderful way to think about this, and it's a very meaningful contribution for the private sector to make. But we also realize that that's not within the realm of possibility for a lot of employer organizations. It's very expensive, and it's also not within the wheelhouse of a lot of organizations I talk to. If I'm going to speak with an advanced manufacturer, they might not necessarily feel like they have a lot of capacity to learn how to be great deliverers of childcare and early education, and that's okay. So my job is to really explain to them what their options are, help them learn more about the needs of their workforce so that they can choose the right one, and then think about what the right first step is for them based on their workers' needs and their budget. And the goal here, again, is not to say you need to wait for the perfect solution to get started. It's about finding the solution that can help you get started today. So the first engagement option that I want to talk to you all about is a pilot called North Carolina TriShare, which is now operating across the state of North Carolina, by the way. Under TriShare, employers share the cost of tuition for childcare and early education services with their workers. So it's because of TriShare, a third, a third, and a third. If an employer organization wants to enroll in the program, they commit to covering 33% of the cost of that childcare tuition. Their employee who qualifies for the program financially covers the remaining third, and then the state dollars that support this program right now also cover a third. So that's a 66% reduction in the cost of that very expensive childcare tuition I was talking about earlier in my presentation that worker can experience, which is a very meaningful benefit. The benefits to the employer for getting involved in this is that they can decide on the offset roughly how many workers they want to be able to serve with this. They can decide on the outset roughly how much they want to spend on the benefit, so there's no requirement that they roll it out to every employee. And in fact, they might not have every employee financially qualify, so that's certainly something we can talk about, is how to right-size this for the employer organization that wants to look into it. It can also cover various forms of care, because we realize caregiving, even for children who are a little bit older, up to age 12, is still expensive. Worrying about things like summer camps and aftercare, this can apply to that too. And also, it's just an extremely rewarding benefit that can really go far in terms of helping that employer recruit and retain talent. If you're able to advertise that you have a meaningful childcare benefit like this, it really helps your organization stand apart. And again, I just want to flag, this is something that was originally rolled out in 3 different communities in different parts of the state, but it is open to employer organizations across North Carolina now. And if anyone around the room wants to learn more about getting involved with it, or if you have employers in your networks who you think might like learning about it, please do reach out to me so I can make sure we get them the right information. Another example that I want to talk about is emergency on-site backup childcare. This is one that kind of comes out of that Moms First and Boston Consulting Group report I was talking about earlier. This is a really exciting example, I think, because it's about that employer looking inward at their workers' needs first before choosing a benefit, and then ultimately finding one that was going to be a lot more moderate in terms of complexity and cost than something like building an on-site center. So the folks at Patch Caregiving who put this benefit example together, they went to a UPS site in Northern California, and they started surveying the frontline workers who were doing sort of entry-level production work and said, what are your caregiving needs? Almost half of them said that they were leaning on family, friend, and neighbor care as their primary source of childcare for their children. So that's usually a grandparent, an aunt, an uncle, a neighbor of some other family member who's going to be delivering primary care for that child. The problem is that among this cohort of workers, there was a pretty regular pattern of unexpected absences. And that's because while family, friend, and neighbor care is an amazing solution in terms of costs and in terms of shift needs and in terms of convenience and cultural preferences, it's also challenging when your care comes down to one person who could also get sick, who could also have to go to a doctor's appointment, who could basically you could find yourself in a situation where you very rapidly need a plan B or a plan C for care that day, and if you don't have it, you're gonna have to call out of work, and that's gonna affect your career. It's very stressful for the worker, and it's also challenging for the employer because they can't really predict these absences, right? So they went to the company and said, instead of having you build an on-site or near-site childcare center to serve these folks who have care they already like and already prefer, what if we created a backup solution that meaningfully recognized those times when these folks are in a pinch and they really need that plan B or that plan C and they need it fast? So they created an on-site emergency center, basically where if you're a worker who needs that plan B care for the day, you are able to reserve it for your child or children up to 10 minutes before your shift. It's very low cost for the worker each day. It is not allowed to be regular care that is leveraged frequently. It's only for those infrequent emergencies. But it's there for you when you need it. And it is a very meaningful benefit that's yielded enormous results to UPS in terms of talent acquisition and retention for those production line workers. They have testimonials from employees in their workforce who are saying, you know, I thought I might have to leave my career altogether, but I feel confident now to take a promotion. I feel confident now to grow in my career with this organization. I feel recognized as a working parent. And those are all very, very valuable and significant things for your workforce to feel, right? They're decision-making drivers that are yielding really big benefits for this company. They've been able to roll it out to other UPS sites in California, Pennsylvania, and now in other states. We're certainly hoping to bring it to a UPS site in North Carolina. And it's also something that's perfectly allowable within North Carolina's licensing and regulatory policy, which is something we've worked on with the Division for Child Development and Early Education in the past year. So regardless of whether you're UPS or not, regardless of whether your headcount is big or small, if you have a workforce that's leveraging family, friend, and neighbor care, this is something that I really encourage you to think about. And we can certainly help you start. And then finally, I want to talk about this really innovative example of child care expansion grants that's operating in the western part of the state. A colleague of mine who is at Biltmore Company, he is their general counsel, and he also works on a lot of organizational and human resource issues there. And they were noticing that they were having trouble hiring for a lot of their hospitality roles. This is the organization that runs the Biltmore estate. So they regularly have as many as 100 open positions in kitchen roles, facilities, garden, all kinds of different things that they have trouble finding people for and keeping them in, despite really meaningful pay increases they've been able to make to their hourly rate in recent years. So they went to the local Partnership for Children first and said, what can we do to get involved with this? We're not really ready to develop an on-site or near-site childcare center, but what commitment can we make to help close this gap for our workers, to help us hire people, and also just to do the right thing for the community? And the partnership told them that Buncombe County at the time only had enough infant slots for 7% of the babies being born each year. So if you're a person with a really young child in Buncombe County, if you're a worker considering taking one of those really exciting, relatively well-paying positions with a wonderful organization, you also need to feel the confidence that you're going to be able to find care for your child. They knew this, and they said, what can we do to help close that gap? The Partnership for Children explained to them that ultimately we have a lot of really wonderful providers of childcare and early education in the county who are rated at 4 or 5 stars, who have the license capacity to serve more children than they're serving. And the reason they're not serving up to capacity is that there are often unmet capital needs that that business owner cannot afford on their very thin margins within a childcare business to cover. So if someone needs an HVAC repair and that's keeping them from filling that room with students and other teachers, or if they needed to make playground repairs to make sure their playground was up to a certain number of square footage so that they could maintain 5 stars, and that was standing in the way of serving them serving a dozen more children or whatever it was. The idea was bringing Biltmore to the table with a financial commitment. In their case, it was $50,000 a year over 3 years, so $150,000 total, which I want to say is not a small amount of money, but it's a lot less than it would cost for you to build a child care center on site at your workplace. They were able to distribute those dollars to already licensed, already very high quality child care centers in the form of grants to cover those costs to make it possible for them to serve more infants and toddlers specifically. And in the very first year of distribution of those grants, they were able to create dozens of new infant and toddler care slots, which I'm not talking about hundreds or thousands, but I want to emphasize again, that's up to dozens of people who might be able to meaningfully participate in the workforce who could not do so previously. And the kicker here is that everyone at the table in this model gets to stick to their strengths. The employer did not have to learn how to be an educator of young children. They did not have to figure out how to hire an architect and an engineer and go through all of this work with licensing consultants to figure out how to operate an on-site childcare facility on their campus. The Partnership for Children already knows how to distribute grants to childcare providers that are in their networks. They're already experts at serving childcare providers in their network. And of course, the childcare providers get to just keep doing more of what they already do really well at a really high level. And it yielded wonderful results. So this is something that I really encourage communities to think about, really welcoming other employer organizations to the table, and it's something that Buncombe has continued to expand. They've invited other employer organizations like Mission Health to welcome into this pilot too, so that they can continue expanding more childcare up to its licensed capacity in the community. So I want to close us out today with just a few key takeaways that I think are really important to remember. The first of all is that this, once again, is really not just something that affects moms and children. It's not something that just affects families. Childcare access is an economic development issue, and it's also a solution. If we invest in more access to affordable, high-quality childcare, we will see results in developing the type of high-quality, trained, skilled workforce that we need across our state, in terms of seeing better economic opportunity in different communities across our state, and also seeing employers yield the results of this success. The second thing is, I just really want to emphasize again, employers have choices. You don't have to default to the most expensive, most complex option to have an impact. And we're here to support you in that decision-making process however we can. I really, really encourage employers in the room to reach out to me. This childcare business liaison role is here for you through NC Commerce to support you in learning more about what your choices are, and we really hope you leverage it. Also, there's not a perfect solution. Unfortunately, because of the complex nature of the childcare problem, we're in kind of a messy middle where we don't have a solution that really adequately fixes all three of those problems together at one time. That's okay, though. I think we have a lot of really exciting innovations and a lot of promising options on the table that can make a real dent in it, and that's really where we need to keep our focus. And then finally, I just want to say we do need to see continuing public investment in making childcare more accessible. I know I talked a lot about private solutions today, but public ones need to be there as well. And I want to say that I'm really encouraged to see kind of like a growing swell of support from many of our leaders in state, regional, and local government to make that happen. Do I have time for questions, Katura?
Yeah, maybe one or two.
Okay.
So she's taking questions if you all have it.
Anybody? Yes, go ahead.
Samantha, is there anything that you're doing to think about the teacher pipeline as well? You mentioned it earlier, that the issue, but
Absolutely, yeah. So thank you for asking about that. One of the three main topic areas that Executive Order 10 has requested that the task force focus on is specifically early care and education, workforce compensation and supports. So we have a work group that's looking into that specifically. There are a number of really impactful and successful things that are being operated in a patchwork. Some communities of the state have one, some communities of the state have others. I can name check Child Care Academies, which is a low or no cost workforce training program for people who want to get involved in early care and education that's being piloted through local partnerships for children. And then of course we have Building Bright Futures, which is an amazing apprenticeship opportunity that is being directed toward early care and education and making sure that childcare operators can get the assistance of apprentices who they can bring on full time later on, with of course wage assistance to cover the cost of bringing apprentices on. And then we have amazing programs like Wages that help elevate the actual pay of educators in childcare and early education, and also really reduces attrition among them. So I think the industry standard is around 30%, and among Wages participants, attrition is down to 13%. But again, none of the programs that I just mentioned there are necessarily available across the state or are necessarily funded to their fullest capacity. So our objective with the task force, one of them is to figure out how do we link all of these things into a frictionless experience where if someone says, I want to get involved in early care and education as a career, it's my passion, it's my purpose, I want to do it, how can we make it possible for them to get training, get an apprenticeship, get wage assistance, get other support that they need to continue their education. If they want to ascend all the way to becoming the director of a center, how do we make that possible for them? We're thinking every day about how we can maximize the opportunities we already have and then consider innovations that are working well in other states too. Mm-hmm. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you for this presentation. And with the cost of child care being one of the main factors, there's a certain balance, especially with these smaller child care providers, when it comes to the regulatory costs.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you work on that regulatory cost and burden, especially with the smaller child care providers?
I think it's a good question. My colleagues at the state are probably best equipped to answer that. I would say that it's a fine balance because licensing and regulatory policy is there to make sure that to the extent possible, we're protecting quality and safety, right? And so we're always going to be in the delicate balance of making sure that we are developing policy, or more specifically, my colleagues who are experts in the child care and early education lane, whereas I'm more in the economic development lane, are doing this work, I should say. But making sure that it's easy to develop a child care business if possible, and that it's possible to earn a living doing it so that people can do it sustainably and hopefully pass their business on to another generation if they want to, without being burdened more than they need to be to make sure that that quality and safety for young children is protected. I wish I had a better answer for that, but it is something that's on our minds a lot. Okay. This is my contact information. Please take it down and feel free to reach out. Thank you all.